Former Pope Benedict XVI has died in the Mater Ecclesiae monastery in the Vatican. According to the spokesperson, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI passed away today at 9:34 a.m. local time. His funeral will take place at St. Peter's Square on the 5th of January. The funeral will be presided over by Pope Francis. According to the Vatican, his body will lie in state Monday onwards at St. Peter's Basilica.
The funerals will be on Thursday this coming week, Thursday the 5th of January, at 9:30 on St. Peter's Square, and they will be presided over by Pope Francis. And as we already told you this morning, from the morning of Monday, the body of the Pope Emeritus will be in the Basilica of St. Peter's, where the faithful can go with their prayers for a last meeting with the Pope Emeritus, to greet him and to say goodbye.
Bells rang out across the Vatican and also at the Munich Cathedral. Earlier, Pope Francis asked for prayers for Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. He had made an appeal at the end of his general audience. In 2013, Pope Emeritus Benedict became the first Pope in 600 years to resign. World leaders have been paying their tributes to the late Pope. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, in a tweet, said Pope Benedict was a great theologian, and his visit to the UK in 2010 was a historic moment for both Catholics and non-Catholics throughout the country. French President Emmanuel Macron and Italian Prime Minister Meloni also tweeted their condolences. Pope Benedict XVI died at the age of 95, but he leaves behind a contested legacy. Let's look at some episodes from his life and times. In April of 2005, Benedict became the first German Pope in 1,000 years. He had to fill the shoes of Pope John Paul II. Paul was one of the most popular popes in Vatican's history, so it was a tough act to follow for Benedict. But he was referred to as God's Rottweiler, a name describing his conservative stance. He was cheered by the ultra-Orthodox groups. He was born as Joseph Ratzinger. He rose through the ranks of the Catholic Church, becoming the Archbishop of Munich in 1977. In 1982, he left Germany to work directly for the Vatican. It was in his near 25-year-long reign at the Doctrine of the Faith that he became one of the Vatican's most prominent conservative voices. But his 8-year papacy was also marred by missteps and scandals. He antagonized Muslims by suggesting that Islam was inherently violent. His outreach to Jews angered some by restoring a Holocaust denier. He even prompted dismay by saying the use of condoms in averting AIDS only worsened the situation. The controversies did not end there. In 2012, his own butler leaked secret documents revealing corruption and feuding within the Vatican. Throughout his papacy, child abuse scandals erupted like a volcano, from cardinals to archbishops. Many were accused openly of sexually assaulting minors, but Benedict was lauded as he began the correction process, in stark contrast to his predecessor. He ordered an inquiry into the allegations of sexual abuse in Ireland. He launched a drive to discipline some of the priests. Pope Benedict then resigned in 2013, citing worsening health. This made him the first pope to do so in 600 years. But even after he stepped down, some conservatives have continued to look at him as the standard bearer and refuse to even acknowledge Pope Francis as a legitimate pontiff. Benedict had been living at the Vatican since then. He kept a low profile after his retirement, but often wrote and gave interviews, becoming a lightning rod for conservatives who opposed Pope Francis. To talk about the passing of Pope Benedict XVI, we're now joined by Archbishop Felix Anthony Machado. He's the Archbishop of Versailles in Mumbai. Thanks very much, Archbishop, for joining us here on WION. Now, like his predecessor, John Paul, Pope Benedict was somebody who reached out to the Jews, and that is something that was one of the major highlights of his papacy. In fact, in his first official act as Pope, he wrote a letter to Rome's Jewish community and then became the second Pope in history after John Paul to enter a synagogue. How do you, looking back at the time that he was the Pope, how do you really look back at his legacy?
Thank you. Let me begin on a very personal note. I worked with him personally, while he was Cardinal, Prefect of the Congregation for Doctrine of Faith, and later as Pope Benedict. I knew him very well, I must say, and personally, it's a big loss, I feel, a void, not only for me, but as one of the great thinkers, Catholic thinkers in our times. And so, therefore, to answer the question you asked me, Pope Benedict had worked with Pope John Paul II since 1982. It is Pope John Paul II who called him to Rome, and since then, Pope Benedict very faithfully worked with Pope John Paul II, and he knew the mind of Pope John Paul II, but more than that, I think he knew the mind of the Church. As a great thinker, theologian, he kind of tried to continue in line with all that was happening with Pope John Paul II. And yes, he had great love for Jews, but let me also say, I was one of the main organizers of leaders of different religions who had come for his installation as Pope when Pope Benedict became Pope and took the reins, as it were, of the Catholic Church. And the next day of his installation, there was a big gathering of all those religious leaders of world religions that had gathered. And Pope was very cordial with them. He shook hands with every leader and gave prominence to them, especially to Muslim leaders who had come from different places in the world. And so Pope Benedict had followed in line of the Church since the Vatican II, and I myself had gone with him to Assisi for prayer meeting for peace of world leaders, religious leaders, to pray, especially after the catastrophe of Twin Towers and what had happened, to pray for peace. And it was a train that left Vatican and went to Assisi and back to Vatican. I was accompanying the contingent that went with Pope John Paul II for that meeting. I was also one of the organizers of that meeting. And Pope Benedict himself personally was with me for that meeting. So, in all, I think Pope Benedict had followed in line with what the Church, Catholic Church teaches, to be in dialogue, to be building bridges of friendship with people of other religions.
Archbishop, it's interesting, how you've spoken to us about your personal experience and interaction with Pope Benedict. Yes, one of the things he will be remembered for was his outreach to the Jewish community, though he did make some controversial remarks about Islam. That aside, let's talk about another aspect of his papacy which cannot be denied: his conservatism. He was described or referred to as God's Rottweiler. The ultra-nationalists always thought that he was somebody who was the ultimate standard bearer for the Vatican, so much so that many of them refused to even recognize his successor, Pope Francis, as a legitimate pontiff. How do you look at that?
Let me first clarify. I don't know what you're referring to, but there were no controversial statements Pope Benedict made about Islam. No, I think I must correct here, because the whole controversy began as a professor in Regensburg, the university where he had already taught. He began his speech by quoting a 14th century author. His main topic was actually religions cannot support violence, or violence cannot go along with religions in the name of God. That was his thesis of the talk. And he began the talk as a professor by quoting a 14th century person in which, see, so many years had passed, nobody had objected. He was a professor, and as a professor, sometimes you kind of make there is an icebreaker. And so he began, let me say, after that, I have followed the entire thing worldwide with Muslims. There were 144 Muslim leaders that came, and we had what now Pope Francis tells us about human fraternity is really a beautiful development between the two popes, because Pope Benedict himself wanted this human fraternity, but in his own time, in a different way. The man was from Germany. The papacy is one. Popes are different, but papacy is one. And in my life, I have seen since Pope John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, and then John Paul the 1st, John Paul the 2nd, Pope Benedict, and now Pope Francis. I'm closely associating with Pope Francis also, because the church always follows according to the times, whatever comes our way. And so that was one thing I just wanted to say. This title that you quote in German about ultra-conservative Pope, this progressivism, conservatism are kind of, our ways of classifying people. Pope Benedict certainly was the child of his own time. He was 95 years old, had himself participated in the Second Vatican Council as an expert. So he was quite familiar with where the church was going, how the church was going. True, it is true that he was ringing some bells of dangers, that we should not slip our foot, and we must remain on the path that the Lord Jesus has shown us. But I don't want to kind of enter into this controversy. But I wouldn't kind of say that he was conservative and other popes are progressives. These are labels that we give them. He did whatever he could. I personally was with him when he saw that there was an abuse of so-called dialogue. Dialogue also can be made into a weapon. There are so many things. Culture can be made into a weapon. A language can be made into a weapon, and against the other. And so therefore, people sometimes put us on this side or that side, on right side or left side. And so therefore, I think Pope Benedict, as a humble man, he was a very good, simple person who lived his faith. Of course, we human beings, when we live our faith, we are limited by our characters, by our sociology, by our world of thinking. And so therefore, but nobody can doubt that Pope Benedict was one of the great thinkers of our time. The nationalism and all what you talk. He was the Pope who went to Umayyad Mosque in Turkey, and he removed his footwear, as the Muslim brothers and sisters do when they enter the holy place like mosque. And barefooted, he also directly looked towards Mecca as the Muslims were looking, as respect to them. This is what we do as Catholics. We don't join others by abandoning our own religion, but we absolutely respect the other for the otherness. And I think Pope Benedict was doing precisely that.
Benedict certainly showed respect for all religions, and as you said, he reflected the times he lived in, something that perhaps every pope does. Archbishop, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today as we look back at the life and times of Pope Benedict. Thank you.
Thank you very much.